Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about time travel. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Chris from All Things Good and Nerdy, a proud member of the Good and Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Just One More Fix. Today is Monday following the Gen Con housing lottery, so hopefully you guys did well in that. And if you didn't do well, then you did maybe well enough. I don't know. We did okay. But I know there were a lot of people that had pretty late times that I saw. So one thing I will say, though, is I've seen lots of posts by different people that says if you aren't happy with the reservations that you got, to just keep checking back on the housing portal because people will cancel their rooms and move different spots, maybe cancel their plans for Gen Con entirely, which would be terrible. But so just to keep checking back on there. And if you still aren't satisfied with that, there is the possibility to just try and get a room outside of the housing block. It may be more expensive, but if it's, you know, you really need to be downtown that bad or whatever, and you're not happy with where you ended up, then there are still other options. So don't be too frustrated. And I guess just don't let it ruin your Gen Con, because I see lots of posts by people on Facebook and Twitter that are really frustrated about it. And I'm like, it's just where you stay. It's not that huge of a deal breaker. For some people, I know it might be, you know, depending on what your situation
it's a barrier.
is.
Still a first world problem.
But yeah.
Suck it up.
Yeah, find a way to make it, and just don't let it ruin your con. You know, I mean, it's just a hotel. So, right on. Second announcement: we, at least me and Lacey, and I think there are a couple other people from the podcast that are going to try and make it to Hoosier Con this year. Hoosier Con is in Indianapolis, and that's who's like WHOSYERCON.com. It's March 30th to April 1st, and event submissions are due by February 23rd. And event registration is March 2nd to 22nd. And it's a free con, and they ask for volunteers and stuff, but you can join the Hoosier Gamers, and they put this con on every year. It's going to be our first year there, but I think we're going to try and run some games. And by we, I mean,
Is there a mouse in your pocket?
I guess me. I am going to try and run some games there. So depending on
next year
how things come out, I think I'm going to run a Mashed game and a Lamentations of the Flame Princess game. And hopefully they don't suck and we'll see you there. Right on.
Okay, so I have this plan for a time machine. I'm going to build it. I'm just kidding. We're not building a time machine, but we are going to talk about time travel. And what got me thinking about this is how much I really love the idea of the unreliable setting, because it's something in an RPG that most of us take for granted. We are where we are and we are when we are, and that is not going to change. And I really don't appreciate security in any nature, in any form, in my RPG.
Right. In real life, yes. In tabletop games, I want
That's
zero
not what you came
consistency.
For. Zero security. Boom.
Right. Dragons, in fact, this is an inverse relationship. As dragons increase, security decreases. Is that how that works?
Something like that, yeah. Time traveling dragons. That's what we need more of.
Actually, there is one in Dragonlance. Kellandros is a time traveling dragon.
Stop it.
Fun fact if you want to be terrified of something else. Anyway.
Does the power temporis count? Is that time traveling in the White Wolf RPG?
It is. Good point. I completely forgot about that. Because I have some good stories then.
Basically here, I'm very excited to talk about RPGs and ideas and things that are going to let me manipulate reality. That's all we're really up to today. Basically, you can approach this from two angles. Somebody is going to control when and where it is that you end up. Now, we can all pretend that it's going to be truly random, but if I tell you it's going to be random where you end up, truthfully, I've decided where you're going to end up and you just don't know.
Right. As the game master, you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
As the game master, I'm saying you have no agency, although I probably do.
So when you get into your time-traveling phone booth and you dial the numbers in, you have to know where they're going to land.
Or it's preset and everybody knows. one of the preset and everybody knows scenarios would be like Back to the Future, right? We all know we're going back to, 1955? And then we're going to end up back in the 80s. That's predetermined. The shenanigans that happen between the two and the mix of events that clash together, that we're going to play to determine. But everybody's pretty familiar with the time that we're going to.
Right.
Then there's the GM random. So for me, this would be like a Doctor Who episode.
So the players have no idea where we're going.
Right, yeah. It certainly seems that the companion has no idea where they're going. And most of the time, it certainly seems that the Doctor has no idea where they're ending up, even though he's the one driving the spaceship. It depends on which Doctor and which episode, but there's definitely some variability there.
I think it's the most fun when he seems to be completely whimsical and has no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the Doctor
Then
that
you're
I
always
like
kind of like, is he just acting and he really knows the whole time?
I don't know. I think it's a solid 50-50 because with the Tennant Doctor, he doesn't really have a full grasp of all his abilities and faculties, and he does seem like he might know, but he doesn't want to look like an idiot either. So,
like occasionally they step out of the TARDIS and he's like, oh, well,
right.
That was not where we intended to go.
Yeah. Because like when they go see the Ood, he's like, where are we?
Yeah.
It was the first time to go see him anyway. So, okay, anyway, Doctor Who moment.
That's one example of that. I can't remember what all we had on the list. The hot tub time machine, I'm kind of forgetting. I feel like they sort of had a destination in mind, but it happened all by accident and happenstance.
I don't know. It was a comedy. There was time travel involved.
But it went back in time to when they were a kid, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of neat in that you're time traveling back onto a previous aspect where you've already been. And I think that could be a really cool thing to pull into a game if you have a long running campaign that's been going on and you sort of know where you started, where it all played out, and where you're at now. So let's have our party end up time traveling back in time and then trying to conflict with their own narrative and what happens from that point.
What would be really fun to do, you just mentioned this, it just sparked an idea in my head. What if, you know how you have those gaming moments, and this would be like you're talking in a long-running game, right? Mm-hmm. And if you run a game for a long period of time, and then there's those moments where, like, I don't know, something happens, poor planning that week, you don't know what you're doing, clunkiness of the game, and this weird stuff happens, and people are like, why does this wizard, why doesn't he have this thing here, or whatever it is, there's just those weird idiosyncrasies in game, right? Well, what if, when you have those moments, right, they kind of stick out in your head, and while you may not be able to recall it right now, but if we mention it from a game, whatever, 6, 7, 8 months ago, right? You probably remember, oh yeah, it was that weird thing where I don't even know why. Did you even plan that out? Like, how did that sort of happen, right? But what if you took the characters and then had to send them back in time to create that idiosyncrasy, that weirdness that happened without crossing timelines with their actual characters, right? So they know what they did, because it's their future selves, right? But they've got to, kind of remember, hey, why did you do this? And it could be kind of a cool moment of reminiscing of cool character moments in games and accomplishments that your characters did. And like getting to relive those moments, but for a purpose, because you can't cross that timeline. You can't meet each other, but you still you have a goal and a task, and you have to accomplish something that's seemed at the moment when your characters were in the story. Why is this happening? Why did this happen? But that moment created the chain of events that led to you succeeding in your quest or whatever it is, defeating the wizard or killing the dragon or whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah. That could be a cool...
Well, that's always one of the cool things in time travel stories too, is how the idiosyncrasies line up to make a cohesive story. And it all sort of makes sense at the end.
It's like part of the genre, basically.
Yeah. Well, like in the Harry Potter movie, right? So you're like, oh, well, Hermione ends up getting hit in the back of the head with a rock that she threw herself. And, oh, there's the werewolf. And the second werewolf howl is actually Hermione again howling. Right. And the person that saves the day is actually Harry himself and not his dad. And all these
There's
things
so
kind of
many
line up
weird time traveling things that you don't realize. Like, we started talking about this. I was like, oh, there's not that. I don't know that there's that. But, like... I think those are better examples of fun ways to do it where it doesn't encompass an entire game. It's like a moment, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And those, kind of like that example we had just before, but like where she's
like, oh, that rotten potato didn't make any sense at the time, but right, now that I see it from the other side.
And I guess if you just want to do something random and weird to your players in a game that you know is going to run for a long time, and I don't know, randomly they get mistaken for the, the town fool and get pelted with rotten tomatoes and cabbage and whatever for some reason out of the blue. And they're like, why did that happen? And then time goes by and you send them back in time to make sure that happens to slow them down so they don't get to the right place at the right time or whatever, if you want to.
You set yourself up.
It could be a cool, fun thing to do, just for the sheer novelty of entertaining yourself, if nothing else. So, it's important. I think there's nothing wrong with entertaining yourself as a game master.
No,
so
I think it's good. And I would even say if you're starting to get bored with your long running epic campaign, this could be a fun way to mix things up.
Right, just start to make some random mistakes. It would take a long time. I guess it wouldn't have to take a long time, but if you took a long time to sort of set these moments up and just had weird, for lack of a better term, glitches in the Matrix, and you did it, throughout several adventures, and then 6 months go by, and then it's like, hey, you have this list of things that you've done, and then they have to go back and do, like, you know what I mean? Like,
when you're doing like a look and find, those picture books.
Yeah.
Right. And you sort of start to notice that even though it's not on your list of things to look for, like the same cat seems to be in every picture.
Why is this cane here?
If you put that into your game, like, oh, you guys are at the end, you see this orange tabby, and then a week later you see this orange tabby cat somewhere else.
Right.
And then you're like, what the hell is going on with the orange tabby cat?
Has anybody
Only
else
to find out a year from now.
Well, the thing is that you can't use a cat because cats have too much sort of symbolic stuff.
Yeah, mysterious baggage.
Right,
mythical baggage.
I don't know, maybe like, a weird hamster or something. I don't know.
Hamster.
You see, like a marmot, like to
Fifi the hamster.
to steal from the Big Lebowski. You've got a guy with a weasel on a leash, just randomly, walking around the pet marmot. But
way too amused by our own idea.
It's all good. I think those ideas are really cool, and they sort of fit into almost any game where you can presumably have some kind of time travel. So if it's in a fantasy game, there's magic, there's time travel, right? That's possible. Now, in most places, it's the forbidden magic, but we all know what forbidden magic means. It just means make it really cool when you do it.
Extra exciting is
Exactly.
what forbidden means.
Yeah, exactly. It's the thing that you do when it's cool. Or if it's a science fiction game, time travel has always been part of, manipulating time and science and all this stuff. So it's easily feasible there. Or if you're in more of like a modern game, like a X-Files style thing. Well, X-Files is easy because it's X-Files. But even if you're in a modern game that doesn't have those elements in there, it's just as feasible to say that someone comes back in time to your time period to get you to do whatever it is.
Or magic.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of, in Warhammer 40K, there's the warp and all kinds of crazy things can happen.
Oh, yeah.
In Lamentations of the Flame Princess, now there's, the vaginas are magic. It has a whole, table of terrible things that can happen and mishaps that can happen and things can blink in and out of existence. And plus, it's weird fantasy role-playing anyway, so you can kind of really lump anything in there as long as it's awesome.
It just occurred to me, there was a really cool moment in a Call of Cthulhu game that Kurt ran where we were new faculty to Miskatonic, and we were at this big house waiting to get our lodgings set up on the campus or whatever, and it was kind of like before the school really got going, and it's a haunted house story, but there was this weird trippy moment where we weren't sure of the linearity of the time, and Kurt did a good job of running this, and I wish he was here to talk about it as it just occurs to me, but I can't remember if he intentionally ran the scenes out of order. So we would have a scene, we would go to sleep, we would have another scene when everybody woke up, but it seemed as if they weren't actually in linear order as we role played them. And there were also some cool moments where I was yelling down the stairs at myself, I remember, which, granted, it takes a lot of finessing and massaging the story as you're going along and sort of trying to remember where the players are now and where they're headed, because there was a moment where we had some kind of a scuffle downstairs, and then later on in the game, no, I'm remembering wrong. I yelled down the stairs for help because there was a scuffle at the top of the stairs, but no one came. And then later on, we were down at the bottom of the stairs, and I could hear myself yelling at me from up the stairs. It was what it was. And it was just this weird kind of...
Well, that kind of brings me to my next favorite use of time. I guess you could call it time travel in RPGs, which is time distortion.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really talking about any kind of linear time travel. So when we did the sci-fi breakdown or whatever, we talked about the Frankenstein Unbound story and how time is just breaking down as a structure as a result of something that mankind has done. So now you have pockets of out of time area and places. So, you're traveling along the road in 1910 Switzerland, and boom, all of a sudden you're in 2005 Australia or wherever, and it happens just in the blink of an eye. I was here and now I'm somewhere else. And I think that is really fun from both the storyteller's perspective, because you get to prepare something completely different from what you were just doing. But it's also fun from the player perspective, because there is absolutely no way to prepare for that.
Right.
And there's all of these small concessions that you have to figure out, like, why all of a sudden am I dressed like somebody from the 1910s in the 2005s?
Right.
And, how do you interact with this completely different, almost alien culture at that point? I mean, you're completely out of your element. And the other one that I really like is there's this graphic novel called Injection. So what happens in this is it's an interesting mix of fairy tale folklore and sci-fi. So basically they make a computer program, but they inject it with like this old sort of fairy tale magic, basically. And
sounds like a good idea.
They create a sentient robot that exists within the computer network system globally, basically, who's capable of taking ideas and extrapolating them and creating things in the world. And so they end up with this like really weird kind of, okay, so all of a sudden we're here with all our computer hacking technology, but also all these mythical creatures of 1600s Ireland are now trying to come to life through this AI intelligence. And the whole thing's being ran by the supercomputer, but it seems very like old-timey fairy tale at the same time, which is an interesting manipulation of time as well. So you're sort of still in the present day, but everything is changed and suddenly made to feel like you're not there at all.
Right. Well, that's a good way to also bring in time travel as a possibility to a world where it shouldn't exist, in that fairy tales is a great example of it. So if you have a relatively mundane world, but there are these fae entities or, true fae entity kind of a creature, they're alien is kind of the wrong word to use, but it conveys this, like, they're not of this world. They're on the bacon and sandals morality chart, right? And that's one of the things that I like the most, is that they do things because they don't make sense to us because they're so far not human. Right. So it's easy to bring those things into any game setting where it wouldn't necessarily make sense to be there, so long as you don't completely break the game. I don't know. I guess it would be really hard to do without breaking the game, maybe. I don't know. Kind of rambled there. But but do you see what I'm saying, though? Like, you walk a really fine line where, because I do like what you're talking about. At the beginning, you mentioned how most settings are pretty well grounded, and that's kind of an unofficial rule, right? There's certain ones where it's not. Like if you're playing in a Doctor Who game, it's kind of assumed that
you're going to be hopping back and forth from time period to time period.
That's part of that setting,
planet to planet.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but in most settings where it's not it's that instability and change isn't a written thing, then it's assumed that we're in Dragonlance or we're in Forgotten Realms or we're in the X-Files, and that's where we stay for the most part. But I think it would be very difficult to sort of, in those worlds where there's no magic and whatnot, it's kind of hard to do it and not completely break things. I don't know. Although it would be fun if you were like in a regular game and the Doctor just showed up. That would be kind of, because there's like when you watch an episode of Doctor Who, it's from the Doctor and the companion's perspective. So he shows up and there's this mundane world going about their business, and then he does whatever his adventure is and then puts things back together.
The first episode with the companion is always him kind of showing up out of nowhere, and they're like, what is happening? Who are you?
Right, but I feel like that's there just as a tool to introduce the companion and to make it so that they feel kind of alienated when they go off with him.
Well, yeah.
But I think it would be neat if you played the game where you're doing your thing and the Doctor just shows up, right? But you did it in such a way that you played off of the things that the Doctor already has. So some random guy that I wouldn't describe as being the Doctor would show up and would have his psychic paper, which has the you make your will save or whatever to see if you detect what it is. But the TARDIS is there, but it looks like it's something that's supposed to be there. It might seem out of place, but it's supposed to be there, and that could be a fun game to run as just like a one-off or something to sort of, maybe you had a really intense moment in the game, or a character died, or you're at the end of a story arc, or just something to sort of lighten it up a little bit and sort of inject some newness and some spontaneity and fun into the game, I guess. When you're at that real tired stage of the relationship with the game, you need to inject some newness into it. But I think it could be fun.
Yeah.
But would that be too game breaking for you? Like if you were playing in a classic D&D, D&D I think is a bad example because there's magic, so anything is plausible. Right. But if you're
any high fantasy game, it can, you can do basically anything because there's magic.
Mm-hmm. But if you're, I don't know, what other, like if you were in an all flesh must be, well, no, because that's zombie apocalypse. If the doctor showed up for the zombie apocalypse and didn't fix it, I'd be pissed.
This is out of my,
wait a second.
Too far gone.
But I don't know, maybe like a Conspiracy X game or something where that happened and then it was just a thing that.
But it's like X-Files though. So like anything can happen with that too.
That's true. I don't know. What's an example where.
I mean, you're not really playing too many mundane, everyday life kind of games.
This is true. So I guess it works in any game. Then.
I'm sure they're out there, but
but like if you played a Call of Cthulhu or Trail of Cthulhu game, it's there because.
Okay, I don't want you to bring Doctor Who into my Dogs in the Vineyard game.
Okay, the Wild West.
That would probably break
it.
Now, if you wanted to do Back to the Future, Wild West, that's clearly lines up.
No, I don't think so. I think that's a game about hard moral choices, and I think that Back to the Future does not fit that.
I'm not saying Dogs in the Vineyard. I just meant the Wild West.
Oh, the Western. Okay, right.
Really, that's just a time travel story with the Wild West theme patched on top.
Okay, fair enough.
Setting, Wild West setting,
Mm-hmm.
time travel themed Wild West setting.
So these have been a lot of examples of time travel moments, right? But that's not the feature of the game.
Well, you can have featured time travel games too, and the easiest example is time travel mission games.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have like the TV show on Netflix, Travelers, is a time travel mission where everything is set in a different time period, but you're kind of disguised and adapting to that. There's Doctor Who, which he doesn't necessarily set out to be doing a mission, but everywhere he goes, there seems to be some sort of problem that he's inevitably fixing.
Right.
So you have that going on, and then. I'm sure there's other examples.
Quantum Leap is one from the 80s.
Yeah, I was going to say Quantum Leap, but I thought they kind of ended up places randomly too, didn't they? I didn't think they particularly programmed in what they were doing. There's a story arc, though, where they have specific moments in mind where they travel to fix them.
There is, but it's been way too long since I've seen Quantum Leap, and I really didn't even like it that much when it was on TV back in the day. But
or maybe I'm thinking of Sliders.
Oh, Sliders is another one. Yeah. But those, I guess, so... What I was trying to get at is, do you feel like there's a difference in how you run the game when it's time travel is the feature and the focus as opposed to the moment that happens in a game? You know what I'm saying? So like if you play a game at Time Watch, so like Time Watch, you travel from time to time doing missions, sort of like a Doctor Who style thing, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that those games run and play differently than a conventional RPG or an RPG where you have a time travel moment?
Yeah. It's an entirely different themed game.
Like specifically how so, though?
Well, the time distortion thing, it does not affect the theme of the game, really. It's just an aspect of the setting. But the themes that you're emphasizing in the game are different. So Doctor Who, like being an episodic game, is not that different from like Firefly. It's just that time travel is what you're working with, but it's still... Have a mission, solve a mission. Have a mission, solve a mission. You're not talking about this overall...
I hadn't really thought about it in those kind of terms, but yeah, you're exactly right. It is exactly...
To me, it's just like epic versus episodic.
Have a job, do a job, have a job, do a job, have a mission, do a mission, save the world, timey-wimey.
And then there's, like maybe one underlying plot point that sort of follows things through.
Well, yeah, it's like if you have the master that kind of follows through time or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are cool to add in there to make it.
In Serenity, there's the whole Miranda thing, what's going on with River's brain.
Right.
But basically all you're playing heroic people solving problems.
And essentially, I guess we're framing this time traveling, but really it's just setting change. Mm-hmm. Because like we're all still sitting around the table, and you mentioned some, flux capacitor or whatever the magical bits are that make you travel through time, right? Whether it's a phone booth or a DeLorean or a magic spell.
Or a hot tub.
All you're doing is changing settings, though, as opposed to...
What's always going to be something big you can fit inside? Why can't it be like a fork? The time-traveling fork. Everybody grab a hold of the fork.
You can only you have to bend the tines. And then everybody holds one tine, and then you travel. Well, I've thought about running a time travel game for quite a while, but just never felt like I kind of grasped how to do it and not make it suck. I don't know if there's like a better way to put it or not, but I guess Doctor Who kind of, because I haven't been a Doctor Who fan for a super long time, but watching those sort of made me realize, if you just do this episodically, I guess it would work. But I never thought about it in terms of missions and just a setting change as opposed to this huge time thing. And we've got to make sure all the timelines line up and whatever.
The initial presentation is a little different because you don't know what the mission is out the gate. And you're just going somewhere, and then the mission presents itself instead of I have the mission first, now I'm going there. It's just a slight switch of
but
what information you get first.
Functionally, if you work for if you're playing Time Watch or Time Works or whatever, there's no actual change in the way you're going to run the game if you get the mission first and then you have to travel there and go there, because it's still just a setting change. There's no actual.
The only change is in what order you give the information.
Right. Yeah.
And really, I think that's the easiest way to do the time travel aspect of a game is just single episodic missions.
Right.
Out of all the things we talked about, that to me would seem to be the easiest
because
one.
like the temporal distortion stuff where you're involving some like Lovecraftian Cthulhu stuff.
That involves much more forethought and planning. It's almost like an investigation game in reverse.
It does, but if you're looking to have those singular moments like I described where I was yelling down the stairs at myself, right? Mm-hmm. That one, in those cases, in those moments, it's not about forethought and planning. I feel like that's more about spontaneity and improvisation, because it's...
I disagree.
Well, hear me out, and then, tell me if I lay this out and kind of how I see it, I guess, right? You can kind of lay out scenes that you can think the players are going to walk through, right? Mm-hmm. But the little moments that are going to have impact, because that one impacted me, because I yelled for myself, basically, and I was like, what the hell? It was like really trippy and weird, because I really like those moments in movies and stories and role-playing games where it's that mind-bending, twisting moment where you're like, what just happened? Those are the coolest moments for me. And I feel like that was one of those times, and it happened because Kirk couldn't have, maybe he could have planned for me to yell down the stairs at myself, maybe, I don't know. But in talking to him about the game afterwards, he didn't, and it was just a thing that he happened to work in there through cool, spontaneous being on your toes and thinking about it and remembering the scenes that had happened before and having set up some weird idiosyncrasies that didn't make sense. And then as the game progressed, he remembered those and then wrapped them back around and tied them back in. That's where I'm saying it's more about those moments are about being spontaneous and improvising. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't think that's entirely being spontaneous, though. That's making note of something and remembering it and then pulling it back up for later. Like, that's not like, I just came up with that right now. Like, nothing happened to spur that off.
Well, okay, the initial moment when you have these weird idiosyncrasies, those don't. But, like, when you bring it back in, like, that's a spontaneous moment where you're like, oh, that slot A, post B, right? That's a improvised moment then, I think. Or no?
I'm not sure. I would have to ask Kurt if it was entirely spontaneous or if you called for help and nobody came and he made note to, okay, so later when you guys are back here, I'm going to pull that in and do it then, in which case that's still planned. It's just short-term strategic planning, I guess.
I think it's a pre-planning argument. But what I'm saying, though, is it wasn't planned in that before the session happened.
No, he didn't sit down beforehand and be like,
that's
okay, this is what's going to happen.
And that's where I'm talking about your improvisation skills, being able to think on your feet and remember those moments that happened and didn't have an answer or had some weird quirk to them, and then draw them back in when they sort of line themselves up in some way with other moments. Now, sometimes those can feel forced, and maybe if you feel like it's going to be forced, you shouldn't do it, because I feel like that takes away from the ones that are good. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So less is more in a lot of those cases, I think. But it was just a cool moment, and I think those are harder to do because I think that takes a fair amount of storytelling and game master experience to be able to do those and do them well. Whereas the other one is I planned an episode of a mission to happen, whether it's that single mission might be one game or 5 games, but it's still
Right.
marching forward.
I kind of wish that Kalen was here for this, because the last time I had talked with him about gaming, he was running a game that was, I believe he was running with the D&D system. He was wanting to find a different system to run, but it was a time traveling game. And as he was describing it to me, he's never watched Doctor Who a day in his life, but it sounded like a Doctor Who game. And his players were kind of like traveling through time and collecting clues and trying to stop this big bad guy that they were chasing through time in a D&D fantasy sort of world. And it was very interesting.
Those have all been examples on the game master side of things. So have you ever, I don't know, because I don't do a lot of time travel stuff, because it's always intimidated me for whatever reason, and just hasn't been something that I decided to pursue. But have there ever been games where as a player you had control of time in some kind of a way? Or have you ever had a game where you gave a player control over time?
I'm thinking. I've never really had control over time exactly, but I did play, which is a little bit different. And I imagine from the outside perspective, when you're not the player with the power, it would probably seem, and in fact, I know it seemed to them like maybe I was outside of time, because I played a Tremere, or not a Tremere, sorry, a Samisi. And I had the power where you can kind of just disconnect and see a broad area and what's happening in that entire area.
So you were a Cold Dune sorcerer, and you had I think it's Path of Spirit, Way of Spirit, one of those.
It's been, I've slept since then.
But it gave you the ability to
basically, the higher built up that attribute is, the larger area that you can see, and you can see all things that are happening, moving, occurring in that area.
Sort of like merge with
all
land.
The time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was fairly good at this, and I could watch a several mile radius area all at one time. And so I knew what was going on. And when I was confronted later by some of the players, I already knew what they were doing and who they were conspiring with and everything, because I had this. And I imagine from that perspective, not knowing that power is a thing, to them, it probably seemed like somehow I had secretly spied on their conversation or was existing in 2 places at once, because everybody had seen me somewhere else. So that's probably the closest I've come to any kind of space-time manipulation.
Okay.
But the reason we're having this conversation is just because I brought up the power Temporis, which is a Brujah power. And
True Brujah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. True Brujah power. And one that I don't think we've ever been allowed to have. But there's also Mage. Isn't there one brand of wizard that has time manipulation as well?
In the original World of Darkness, there is a sphere called Time that allows you to manipulate time. And I have had a small handful of characters that have manipulation of time. I had what's called an Akashic Monk, or an Akashic Brother, which is a mage in Mage of the Awakening. And they are able to manipulate time. So it makes them look like they're going faster. So like when you would watch videos of Shaolin monks punching really fast, right? What my character was doing is I wasn't actually moving faster. I was just slowing time down for everyone else. So it's not the same, but it is. Tomato.
The difference between how Quicksilver actually works and how we're forced to show him in a movie in order for that to make sense.
Exactly, right. It's a lot less cool if it's just like, zip, oh, he was a blur. No, we didn't actually have to cast anyone. We just made a blurry thing, and then that was it. But that character, I never had enough of it to do anything other than in kind of a combat situation to move faster. I couldn't like travel way back in time or way forward in time or anything like that. It was more subtle manipulations along the lines of something like Celerity from Vampire, getting multiple actions in a round and that kind of stuff. Now, I did have a true Brujah in a LARP game, in a Vampire the Masquerade LARP that had a lot of Temporis. And I managed to keep it my strategy for LARP has always been to have some kind of trump card, because Vampire games are all about trying to screw everybody over and get over on someone, and betrayal and collusion and coercion and all this kind of stuff. So most of my characters that I built, I always had some kind of ace in the up the sleeve. And with this character, no one knew that I was actually a true Brujah, and I had a fair amount of Temporis that I had built up because I played this character for a long time and never actually used it. And eventually people come to kill me because I was a bad person. and I manipulated the city and la la la, whatever. But I will say, when I did break it out and I used it, it was the most horrific broken thing I've ever seen, probably in any, for sure, any Mind's Eye Theater LARP and in any tabletop game, because the way the power worked is that I went to go through and I did all my challenges for physical challenges to do things to people and whatever. And the way it works is that in Mind's Eye Theaters, you do paper, rock, scissors, for those of you that don't know. So I went through and I did all my challenges, and then I had a power at a certain point that I could spend so much willpower and rewind time and redo it all. But you couldn't change what you threw in the test. So if you threw scissors, you had to throw scissors. So essentially, if you had the willpower, you could just go back and do whatever you wanted. Granted, it was a way to write my character out of the story. This huge moment happened. Cool climax for the chronicle and the story of the game and everything. And then I was like, this guy is way too broken. And I didn't want to be the player that just broke everything and made everyone have no fun, right? Because that's not fun for anyone.
I'm pretty sure from there on out, like, nobody else was allowed to have Temporis.
Yeah.
At LARP after said event, because everyone realized that. And that's the problem, right? Is at that point, there's so much agency in going back in time and changing things that sort of like, why did we bother telling this story in the first place?
Well, yeah.
If you could just go back and like rewrite all that, this is what really happened, guys. And maybe if that's just like a once in a, not even once in a session, like a once in a story arc kind of power, then that would be okay. But if it's something that you can just drop back and do anytime you want, that's so far beyond like.
Well, and I to be fair, JD, who's a really good friend of ours who was running that game, who was a storyteller for that game, I've known him for a long time. I've played lots of characters and things and not abused, certain powers in ways that I could to benefit the story, because LARP, just like any other RPG for me, is not necessarily about the powers that I have, but the story and the highs and lows of the game.
Right.
So he trusted me enough to say, hey, make this character. It sounds like it'd be a cool thing to have in the game. Plus that we can see how it actually works in game. We've talked about it and read the rules and seen it, and from one storyteller to another been like, oh, what do you think? Well, why not? Let's just try it and see what happens. I think if it had been in a different situation, and let's say that I didn't want my character to come out of the story at that point, and there was an argument or disagreement about that, it would have created a huge change in the power dynamic because of the abilities that I had. So I think you have to be very careful about putting these powers into players' hands, because it can be very unbalancing.
Right.
And I think if you're going to put it in the player's hands, first off, make sure it's a person or a player that you can trust to take guidance and, hey, I need you to pull back here a little bit and not go all in or whatever. In my case, you can, in those political situations, you can kind of see the mob forming. Before that game, I had a conversation with JD and said, hey, I think things are going to go bad tonight. So this might be the last game for my character. And if it is, that's cool. Let's try and make plans for what will happen. And just so you know, I think this is going to happen. Because in those cases, in a LARP situation, the storyteller can't see every moving piece at the same time, because you're only one person. You don't have Temporis or the Way of the Spirit in real life. But it worked because I was ready to write that character out of the storyline. And when that happened, it was great. And it really sort of, if you're not familiar with the way Vampire works, that moment bound the city together. Like when you have really bad guys that are sort of insurmountable enemies that you're not going to be able to beat unless the whole city comes together, that's the only way you actually get everybody together, because, well, they're all vampires. It's just not going to happen. So it was a cool moment in that it galvanized the city together and then wrote my character out in a cool way. And then I made something new and came into the game and it was all good. But I think you just have to be extra careful, because that could have gone haywire at so many different points. And I do know that out of the 20 or 25 people that were playing in the game, some of them were frustrated and they were a little upset with it. And then when they found out afterwards, after the game had ended and we had a conversation, I'm like, no, that character's gone. He's not coming back. It's all good. Because they were like, it's not fair. Like in Vampire's never fair, but there are degrees of fairness that people are willing to accept and not willing to accept. And so then once it all got cleared up, it was okay. But there were some people that weren't happy about it. So I guess you just food for thought. And I don't know we did it well, I guess. Everybody felt like we did a good job with it. So
I just
think about
feel
that.
like if there's a power that I have, I want to be able to use it. And if it is so broken that it can't be usable, then the power is written poorly.
Well, there are issues with game balance, and that's a whole different discussion. But there have been other games, though, in tabletop games. Lee played a Shrew Bruja before, but he didn't have a whole lot of temporis. So some of these powers, it's more about how much of it you have as opposed to how little. And if you make it harder to gain access to those powers, you can kind of restrict it that way. But if you play the game long enough, they're going to level those powers up to where it's going to be broken, essentially. So I guess either work out those hard limits at the beginning or what, I don't know. It also kind of ties into prophecy a little bit and how you deal with precognition and prophecy in games and the Banshee's power.
Yeah.
You know, but
That's a different thing.
I agree, but it kind of starts to blend together there a little bit. But I've got flashbacks written down. It popped into my head as we were talking about things. Do you see that as the same thing as time travel, or is that just like,
No.
you know, a non-linear story?
That's just a non-linear story.
Okay, cool. I agree. It just a kind of a little thought. I think it's a cool way to use things, I guess. Flashbacks is not something you see very often in games or whatever, but it just
I think
a
it's
thought
cool, but I feel like it's a separate
onto itself.
thing,
Okay.
like Memento, the game.
Oh, Memento. God, that movie's so good. That's an old movie. When did that come out?
I have no idea.
Man.
90 something, 2000 something.
Yeah, early 2000s or late 90s.
It all runs together.
It's a great movie, though. All right, well, I think we'll just mention a quick list of some inspiration in different games for time traveling stuff.
The
So,
first time I saw that movie, it was on an airplane. That is
Oh,
a
wow.
weird movie to play for an in-flight movie.
yeah, it definitely
People are like sleeping and in and out. And
Right.
like,
Waking up, what is happening? Because, like, it replays certain parts of that show over and over again. So if you went to sleep and then woke up, you're like, wait, what? Like, and if you did it, like, if it was timed out perfectly, you could totally think you were losing your mind if you woke up like 3 times and saw him talking to the guy at the hotel counter. That would be awesome. It'd be really trippy.
also, it would be pretty sweet to be the person that gets to pick what's played for the in-flight movie.
Yeah.
Like, you know that nobody can change it at all.
Right.
You're just like, this is what I'm playing. Ha!
I'd play like
Deal with
Memento and Requiem for a Dream. Those would be the 2 most weird movies to have in flight. All right, well, if you're interested in RPGs about time travel, there's several of them. There's one of it is TimeWorks. It's in the World of Shadow book for Fate. It's just a Fate core supplement. So you use the Fate core system and it has some additional rules.
Oh, I remember seeing that now.
So that one's a cool one. That's actually
I read
what
through part of that.
yeah, that's one that actually, when I had been toying with the idea of a time travel game, I was between using that or Time Watch is from Pelgrane Press, I believe, and it is a time traveling mission style game from what I understand of it. And there's several other of these, but we haven't played most of these. So Doctor Who, Day Trippers, Spectrum, GURPS Time Traveler, because it's a GURPS supplement for everything. And that one on Kickstarter now, apparently Retro Casualty. Is that what it was? I think so.
Retro causality.
Oh, wow. Not even close. Retro Causality. And that's on Kickstarter now.
I'm shaking my head at you.
It
Retro
happens.
Casualty sounds like a 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie.
Retro Casualty. Last Action Hero. It's a sequel to Last Action Hero.
It's Last Action Hero meets Eraser.
Retro Casualty. Get on the chopper. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us this week. Quick plug for All Things Good and Nerdy, episode 298, A Lucky Willie's Foot. This week, a decision is made to remove Willie's foot and make a keychain out of it. The crew also recaps some of the latest trailers for Solo, Venom, and Deadpool. All look pretty good. Before discussing Harrison Ford's involvement in the upcoming Solo, a Star Wars movie. So check that out. That is All Things Good and Nerdy, episode 298, A Lucky Willie's Foot. As always, you guys can support us by following us on Twitter at Just One More Fix or going to our Patreon for early access to our actual plays and our raw audio feeds and pre and post shows. Right now, there is the 10 Candles actual plays up there. So if you guys want to check that out, you can find us online at justmorefix.com. I think that'll do it for us. So I guess we will see you guys next week.
Later.
Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.